So, good morning. Hello. This is the latest 𝗟𝗓𝗦𝗧𝗘𝗡 podcast where I'm trying to reflect different chapters of my book. And today's subject is really the thorny subject of non-exec directors. And my guest today is Stephen Waddington, who is a kind of serial non-exec director in many ways and has a lot of experience. Reading about him, he's studying for a PhD. He's run his own company. He's been a visiting professor. He certainly has a thirst for knowledge. Now, his words, not mine. He describes himself as an ex-egotistical monster, but reformed, apparently. So we hear. So
Oh, where did you get that? Where did you get that? But yes, it's true. It's true.
I got it from a previous interview that you did, and unless it was somebody, a
No,
ventriloquist
it's right.
disguising
It's
themselves
so
as you,
right.
it was you. It was you.
Yeah, it was.
Anyway, welcome, Stephen. Good afternoon. Very good to meet you. So let's kind of broach this this thorny subject. Do you want to start off by just giving us a little bit of a background on how you came to this place? Because you've got quite an interesting where you've been a hired help, you've run your own business, you've helped other people, you've coached, you've mentored. Just tell us a little bit about how you've got to here.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to this conversation. So, Mike, trained originally as an engineer. Didn't much like engineering, but took that knowledge into the sphere of communication. And at the end, started my career during the 90s as the internet was being built out. And there was a real need at that time for people with a technical knowledge who were able to communicate about, what was quite complex issues. So I started my life as a technical writer. Then I moved into agency side. Before that long, and this is where the egotistical monster comes from. Inevitably, through the foolishness of youth, thought I could do a damn sight better at running a business than my boss could, and so started my own company, a technology based PR agency, and through luck and good fortune, that grew really quickly as the internet was being built out, and so we were working with the companies that were providing the plumbing for the internet, but also building that first layer of websites on top of the internet. So that company was really successful, and then so did that. Then I did another startup agency, this time focused on social media. This was in the mid noughties when when there was this complete fragmentation in different types of media. And brands were really trying to understand what that meant for their reputation. So um, actually, the same team from our first agency got back together. We created the second agency called Speed. That was incredibly successful as well. In both instances, we were right at the right point in time with a really differentiated proposition, and built really good, strong businesses. I exited that business in 2006, and then went and worked for a large international group, which I hadn't done before. And I helped them basically do what I'd done with my agencies in modernizing the business. Fast forward to lockdown, and I spotted this opportunity, that creative agencies, PR agencies, marketing agencies really needed the sort of grey hair and wisdom of, I guess, that comes with age, of having 25 years of experiencing the ups and downs of, of recessions and so forth. And so I launched my own professional services firm. And I built a portfolio of, I guess, a dozen or so agencies, mainly in the communication space. I'm helping founders, realize value and grow their businesses through what has been a really challenging time.
I'm starting to see a kind of theme here of growing, scaling businesses, and also kind of surrounding yourself with the right people, the right team to do that, the right kind of qualities and mix of people. And thanks for bringing us up to date. I'm sure we'll talk more about your future aspirations, but I've got to ask you a question that I ask myself every now and again, which is why the hell would anybody want to be a bloody non-exec director? You know, with all the fiduciary responsibility that comes with it. You've got your head above the parapet to be shot down if you do anything wrong. It's hard to get well rewarded. If you're rewarded with some kind of equity, your independence is challenged. It's kind of not an easy place to be, and sometimes I wonder why people like you and I ever choose to do it. What do you think is the kind of key magic, the pixie dust that getting a non-exec director can do for a business if it's done properly? Are we not mad?
I think it's the wisdom of age and an experience, and you know we're at an incredible time in economic history, political history, and the confluence of what's happening in the world, and it takes a very brave individual, an entrepreneur, to set out and set up their own business. You know, those that do need to surround themselves with the smartest thinking and experience that they can, and that's where the non-exec director comes in. You're buying access into somebody who has been there and done it and seen it, and is probably highly motivated because of their own personal experience to see your personal success. Tends to be individuals who are, I mean, so we're now we're describing it, non-exec directors that support growth, and that's firmly where I work, helping entrepreneurs build businesses. You know, it tends to be people that have shared values, shared aspirations, and just thrive off the energy of creating something and building something. I have to say I've stayed well away from the corporate sector and public companies. That's just not where my skills lie. My skills absolutely lie, and I recognise this in helping people build.
And that's interesting. So you see the role as a non-exec director, and not being critical of this, I'm just kind of questioning it, is you're really assisting a person, generally the chief exec, rather than being a kind of non-exec for the board as an entity. It's generally building rapport and understanding an individual. Is that right? I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
so you operate along a spectrum. And I have to say, you know, the first thing I did when I just set up on my own was do the Institute of Directors qualification as a non-exec, to get, you know, ensure I had the right skills to be able to handle the aspects of governance, and that does come into play, you know, around financial responsibility and reporting and such like. But day to day, the role is predominantly a coach, support, mentor, somebody who has access and a network, and is able to provide support to the entrepreneur and individual.
Yeah, and I've not done that course, the Institute of Directors course. Was there anything surprising on there, or were there any kind of guidelines that you know made you kind of sit back and think, actually, I need to just embrace this a little bit?
Certainly, the rules around financial regulation and reporting, and I have to say, you know, having having gone out as a non-exec director, I have surrounded myself with like a board of advisors and people I trust and know, who I can bring in, provide the skills alongside me if they're needed. So I'm thinking about particular issues of risk around human resources, around finance, you know, and around legal and law. So yeah, you know the limitations of your own expertise and being able to call on people in your network who are able to provide the support and help. Again, that's another important part of the NED role, having a team of trusted advisors who you can draw into an assignment to help a business owner, you know, with some of the challenges that they might face.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. And then just kind of moving forward, I always think there's a kind of there's a kind of there's a kind of scale that you go on as a non-exec, where you're offering guidance but not being too assertive. You have the greatness, if you like, of not being beholden to an entrepreneur who often surround themselves with yes people. You know, a lot of entrepreneurs I've worked with have surrounded themselves by sycophants whose wages depend on the person that they're working with. And I think one of the great benefits of being a non-exec director is you really can be independent, and because your mortgage isn't dependent on the money that you're taking from the kind of corporate trough, you really can speak your mind. But there's a kind of judgment call about how far you can go and how assertive you can be. How have you found that in the experiences that you've had with the people that you've been working with? You know, without being personal.
No, that tension and discomfort is great because it's a source of learning, probably on both sides. There's two issues there, I guess, to unpack. I took some advice from a very good friend of mine who works in recruitment when I first started out on this journey, and they said, for all the reasons you suggest, that the role of a non-exec director within any organisation is probably time limited. Because you get too friendly and establish personal relationships, and so that degree of scrutiny maybe disappears. The ability to call an individual out, as you suggest, is so important. I find, if you've operated in during my career over 20, 25, 30 years, I'm more than able to have difficult conversations and call people out. It's an essential quality of anyone working in business in an appropriate way, and certainly do that with the companies and the organisations with which I work. I've only found myself in one situation where you provide advice to an individual, and maybe you let it slip once or twice when they don't listen, but then the third time you decide it's time to move on. And I definitely think that's really important. Maintaining that independence and scrutiny is so critical to the role, because it's fundamentally what we do.
It is, and I've not had that conversation before about the kind of not time barred, but the kind of appropriate length. You talk to your auditors now, and they talk about best practices. Changing your auditors every 3 years or whatever it is. But what do you think is the kind of appropriate period of time when you just kind of examine the relationship and decide whether to sign up for another period of time?
So
is it a year? Is it 2 years? Is it a kind of 3-year stretch?
I think it's probably 3 years. I think that's probably appropriate. I think some relationships just are have a natural life cycle. And thinking, if you support an organisation through an M&A activity, a merger activity, an acquisition, now you can go through that process as a non-exec director, and then find that it creates a natural point at which to step away. I'm probably quite honest with myself in scrutinizing all my relationships on an annual basis, if not more frequently than that, to determine if I am providing value, and that test of whether you're being listened to and whether your insight, your input is considered as part of decision making is absolutely critical. And at the moment you find that you're not, then it's almost certainly time to move on.
It's interesting, isn't it? Do you think there's a kind of blurred line between coaching, which is, I know, something else that you and I kind of both do, and doing that kind of non-exec role? Because it could be argued on the non-exec front that people are becoming specialists now, and you might need more than one non-exec direct. As you suggested, if you're floating the business, you might need somebody with some financial acumen or somebody who's floated the business before. You might need some marketing help or some social media help. You might need some training help. There are all kinds of aspects that entrepreneurs need, other tools or clubs to put in their golf bag. Have you worked on boards where there's been a kind of plethora of more than one non-exec, or do you tend to go more the coaching role?
There's two. There's two types of organisation. There's smaller organisations where you do provide, you predominantly you're brought in as a coach, and you help them grow the business, and the relationship develops, and to the point where you're then participating in monthly or quarterly board meetings. And then there's the other where, exactly as you described, more mature organisation, typically larger organisation, where you might be one of a number of non-exec directors brought into a board as part, to help provide access, to help provide scrutiny, or to help provide specific skills around the boardroom table, as you describe. It's a really interesting point you make, actually, because I've been given the job spec. I was given the job spec a couple of weeks ago for a board, actually, in the public sector. I was invited to join or considered be part of the consideration process. And you just look at the skills of the individuals around the table, and you know instantly why and what they're looking for in terms of, in this case, it was, they needed help with stakeholders and community management. So yes, and there is that continuum, I guess, from the coach mentor through to the fully grown up non-exec director.
It is interesting because it's there's a kind of sense of responsibility that comes with the role as well, in that you kind of, exaggerating slightly, but you kind of take on this kind of Gandalf type approach, and sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes we do get it wrong, don't we? I mean, they say it's easy to be successful in business. You just have to predict the future and be right. Well, predicting the future in this climate with the headwinds that are coming towards us isn't very easy. Can you remember examples in your portfolio where you've not got it right, or where the advice hasn't been?
So you're exactly right. There are some absolute fundamentals, though, and you think about the environment we're living in the moment. Potentially, we're in a recession already, or we're skirting along the bottom of low growth. There's high levels of inflation. It's absolutely critical that organisations manage cash. So we've got a playbook. After 10 years in business, exactly what you need to do in such a climate. Negotiate all your liabilities as short as possible, and invoices as quickly as possible, and make sure you collect. And any debt that goes over a day, you're on it immediately. So there's a playbook, and that's the beauty of a non-exec director. It's incredibly good value advice and support, I say. And you pull this point out in your book, that for an organization, that experience and just the confidence it gives an entrepreneur, founder, a management team, to say, no, we're not accepting a day overdue. We're not providing credit. We're not, we've got to recognize our own value and our own power, and use that appropriately. I think that's absolutely critical. When it when it doesn't go well, when it goes less well, I would say the times when it doesn't go well is when your advice isn't followed, and that sounds arrogant, but I make it my personal mission to be as up to date as possible on all contemporary aspects of law, HR, legal, finance, from a risk point of view. So the situations where it doesn't go well maybe be related to an instance of HR or a negotiation, but typically as a non-exec director, you will have considered all the risk factors. So you'll be aware of all the issues in the round in making a decision. And that's not to say you don't ever make or support an organisation in making bad decisions. Of course you do, but part of your responsibility is to have this um, broader broader remit.
I mean, in my book, I talk about I talk about the things that have gone wrong as well as the things that have gone right. And I've been an investor and a manager of different businesses, and some of them have done very, very well. Some of them have done fantastically. That's great, but some of them haven't gone so well, and one of them went bust. And I think in some ways you learn a lot more from pain than you do from pleasure. If you put your hand in the fire and you burn it, you kind of soon remember not to do it again. And I think from my own experience, I sometimes say that I've made all the mistakes or many of the mistakes, so you don't have to.
That's a good line, actually. I'm going to borrow that because you're right. In my, and I do an absolute, especially at the moment, I have an absolute ruthlessness around debt. With the organisations with which I work, and that comes from almost losing the house, as you suggest, in a former life where we were lenient on a client, and you know payments slipped and slipped and slipped, and they went bust, and we became a creditor. So yes, yeah, your experience and wars and scars from past wars help inform your current situation for sure.
I think that's right. And in this country, we're sort of, generalizing, we're sort of a bit embarrassed about failure. And failure, in some respects, is just finding another way not to do something. When we're at school and we decide not to play the violin anymore, or not to play football, play hockey instead, we're not failing, we're just experimenting. And I think that this, in this kind of modern world, especially from a technology point of view, there is a lot of try lots of stuff and keep what works kind of a mantra or mentality about. And, and sometimes I think it's our job as non-execs to just kind of pull back on the reins a bit if things clearly aren't working. That old expression: if you're riding a dead horse, get off.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. But part of your experience and knowledge that you bring to the boardroom table, or your advice is, uh, the call on how long to let a risk run and when to call time on the dead horse, as you suggest.
Did you find it difficult? I'm asking these questions because I found it difficult, but did you find it difficult to kind of stop being a chairman or a chief exec or a business owner when you're in a room with your non-exec hat on, and to kind of relearn that behaviour to be an advisor? Look, I'm offering advice. You don't have to take it. Here's my advice. Here's my experience. You've hired me as a non-exec. You're paying me every month, uh, rather than the kind of assertiveness that you might have had as part of your DNA when you were the boss.
There is a temptation. And I'm laughing now because I'm thinking of one particular relationship I've got, where you turn up month after month after month, and the job hasn't been done, and yeah, you do, you do, you do then get frustrated and want to roll your sleeves up and get on and do it yourself, but you can't. You can't. It's not your job. Uh, you can't because it's not very good, not a very good way of learning, and you can't because you by your very nature you're a non-exec. But yeah, that frustration exists, Absolutely. And I've also thought many a times, you know, if I had my time again, I'd be going and doing this, I'd be going and doing that, and I've used that. I've said that. You find you work in some exceptional businesses where an entrepreneur has created a value proposition around a product or service or innovation, and you can see they've got the energy and fire, and they're absolutely going for it, and that's just brilliant to see. And yeah, I'm kind of glad to be able to share the journey with some of those companies.
It was certainly a shift that I had to make and learn to make. And the other shift that I found difficult, if anybody's kind of watching that's considering having a career as a non-exec, is when you're running a business, you kind of tend to be this monomaniac with a mission. All your working hours and some of your sleeping hours are really focused on exactly what you should be doing and catastrophizing and having this kind of positive paranoia about what happens if this goes this way or this goes that way. And suddenly, if you've got a portfolio of businesses that you're advising, there is a kind of question about, you've got to divide your attention, haven't you? You've got more than one child. You've got 2 or 3 or 4 children, and how accessible should you be? Would you take a call at 11 o'clock at night from one of your portfolio businesses? Probably you would. But if you had 2 or 3 that were always phoning you at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, it might be a bit more difficult. How have you, or how do you
That's a
think?
really interesting point. Managing that relationship is really interesting because
Well, managing more than one relationship, I think, Stephen, was what I found difficult.
mm,
What's your kind of view on that?
so setting boundaries, I mean, is really important. So as part of a term of engagement, making it clear when you'll be available and when you won't be. And typically, I work, office hours, um, whatever business hours. That's not to say I'm not available in the evening or at weekends. Of course I am, but we have to be working through an area of risk related to something financial or an HR risk, um, to be called on that time. Or there'll be a special project. I think during a merger or acquisition, flotation, as you suggested, um, you have to go at the speed that the process is going, and that necessitates working additional time. In that case, as a non-exec, I will have negotiated what that might look like, what that change of engagement might look like, and we're also aware on both sides of what the terms are.
So, if I can just, I can't resist this. So cheekily, if I just kind of take you out of this interview now into your kind of non-exec, to put one of your non-exec hats on. Every time I wake up in the morning now, we're living in a very odd world, aren't we? There are some big headwinds. We're in this post-COVID, post-Brexit world where there's a war on, the stock market's fallen. Bitcoin, which was going to be the replacement for the gold standard, seems to be crashing through the floor and taking a lot of cocky people driving their Lamborghini Uruses with them. Interest rates look like they're going up. There's kind of hyperinflation. What I'm putting on the spot here. What kind of general advice are you giving people at the moment about the times that where people are growing businesses in, or are we in survival mode again? Is it like
Oh no, we're not in survival mode now. It's quite interesting how there are almost two economies, and we're sat here in the UK. There are almost two economies in the UK. There's two speeds. There's the consumer economy, which, if you believe everything that's coming out and reported in the papers and from the Office of National Statistics and so forth, is shuddering to a grinding halt. Uh, and then there's the B2B, the enterprise market, which is completely different. And it seems to be, and this has been the case since May 2020. We had that hiatus going into COVID, but then British ingenuity, and I firmly believe this, of the ingenuity of British business, has worked out its way around so many of these different problems. You didn't mention Brexit, but If you're a company with a supply chain in Europe, you're also facing challenges at the moment. But by and large, entrepreneurs are working their way, and business people are working their way around all these different issues. And so we do. There's this odd thing. We do seem to have a two-speed economy at the moment. Um, that said, um, the basic playbook for running into a recession or low growth and high inflation is conserve cash and lock everything down. And so that's where I'm focusing with all of my clients, making sure that you get your invoices out early, you collect as quickly as possible, um, you fix your costs, and terms with suppliers.
It's again interesting that we seem to be, especially within technology, working in a full employment economy at the moment. Whilst you might say general unemployment figures might be 3.4%, in tech, I suspect they're much less than that.
I think it's broader than that. I think there's I was thinking about 3 or 4 companies in my portfolio at the moment. They're all struggling to hire talent, skilled talent, and yeah, some are in technology, some are in marketing, financial services. I just think that the business to business enterprise market seems to be holding up and be quite robust. Um, and I think the ingenuity of business is driving us through this.
And the flexibility, I guess. I mean, expanding that, I was trying to get a squad of cleaners to just have a deep clean of my. Had a bit of work done on the house at home, and the first 2 people we phoned up said, "We're so busy, we're not taking on any new clients." These are cleaners, um, and I have to think in a year's time that might be different. When people have digested mortgage rises, travel rises, fuel rises, unemployment starts to show. We're starting to see strikes tomorrow. I think that there are going to be some challenging rapids to navigate, but you couldn't be in a better place than tech.
Do you know what? So Gary, I work with a recruitment agency, and every month we start the board meeting saying, have you seen any slowdown yet? And we've been doing that for 6 months. Have you seen any slowdown? And they've not. They just haven't. So yeah, I I I I, I don't quite understand what where the energy is coming from, because you're getting all this consumer data coming through, and you can see the costs in front of you climbing up, and we absolutely know, it's not sustainable. Um, so yeah, and some sort of slowdown is inevitable, and it's coming, but it's not here at the moment.
Thank you. We got a bit off piece there. By the way, I also run a reasonable sized recruitment business turning over hundreds of millions of quid. And for the first time last week, we are seeing some of the bigger clients just rein back on big projects now, especially
Right,
in the States, in New York, where they're just saying, we might try and do this in house now. We might
right.
just see how it see how
There's your indicator then. There's
so
your indicator.
just
That's the
early
canary.
barometer. Early
Yeah, that's the
barometer.
canary.
Anyway, I've gone off the subject slightly because it's interesting, and I think people watching might find this interesting too. Um, but let's come back and just kind of try and re-examine the really important qualities that non-execs have. We've talked about the kind of experience that we've had. We've talked about the kind of failure that they've had. It's a kind of experience, grey hair to kind of keep the marbles rolling down the hill. What are the bad qualities that some non-execs have that you've seen that people should look out for?
I think so. Just thinking about my own personal development and the support around me, without necessarily being critical about others that I've met. around a boardroom table. I think keeping your skills current, keeping your knowledge current. I mean, we've unpicked in a quick 5 minutes the macroeconomic situation both in the UK and then largely across the world, and um, that ability comes from being across multiple sources, reading widely, and having a broad understanding of the business context. So I tend to hoover up um, news and information. The Financial Times, Harvard Business Review, McKinsey reports, Bain reports, all the data so coming out. So I've got an understanding of that, but then also an understanding of government and policy and what's happening there to give a broad perspective from where you're able to provide advice. So I think that's important. I think personally a level of humility um, is important, but that needs to be balanced as well with the confidence that you have domain expertise, you have professional expertise, and you're able to bring that to bear. The final thing is the learning, and I think that's what keeps me fresh. You mentioned at the top of the interview that I'm doing a PhD at Leeds Business School, and I'm deliberately doing that to keep my domain expertise as sharp as possible, and in fact push out into a new area that to hopefully create new knowledge that will help people in the future, and that again exposes me to another community of researchers as scientists at the business school, and just keeps me on my edge and fresh.
What specialist route have you taken on your PhD?
So there was a moment in my domain, public relations, communications. There was a moment during COVID where the function was elevated because we helped professional communicators, CEOs, and boards lent on their communication team to help. First of all, with the reorganization of organizations as they shifted, if they were one of the office bound if they're an office-bound enterprise and they shifted to working from home, they would totally reliant on comms and public relations to help with that change. And then through the COVID crisis, managing complex stakeholder environments. And so I did a piece of work for the NHS on that, and I did a piece of work during COVID for the Government Communication Service and found the function elevated. Um, and took that to Leeds Business School and said, "There's something happened here. Are we finally seeing our industry professionalizing?" And that's where I'm exploring the contribution of public relations and commerce to innovation within an organization.
That's okay. Again, that's again learning new skills. The two things that I would say that I've seen that I find unattractive about people in NED roles, you use the word humility, which I think is great when it's balanced with some confidence and some competence. Uh, but often there's a kind of narcissism about some of the non-execs where they'll say, "This is how you should do it. Just do what I tell you." And I think that's highly unattractive. And I think that's linked to a kind of knowledge of historic success rather than taking all the information that's coming in now, which is more different than it's ever been, and having the skill to kind of distill it and in a kind of more debated environment, decide on the right path. So I would certainly steer clear of kind of any kind of arrogance, and people that have kind of been resting on their laurels. Um, I worked with a very nice gentleman in my early career who had a portfolio of businesses where he was a non-exec, and after about 2 years, you kind of sussed out that there wasn't a great deal of skill in this gentleman. He was sort of picking up best practices from his portfolio businesses and then sort of taking them to the next one. It's kind of hoovering up ideas and just sharing them. And we kind of parted company after that. But it took a while for us to to kind of find him out, really.
So I think you've got two toolkits as a non-exec director. You've got the domain expertise that you bring from your years of experience of running a business. So knowledge and actually experience, not only skill but experience of situations, and that's one tool bag. And then the other is your expertise associated, yes, with your track record and your knowledge that helps you, helps you support organisations in particular in this instance where most of my work seems to be is around growth and helping a founder create a sustainable organization around them. And I think you just can't afford to trade on your past successes, because we're living in a world that's changing so quickly. And I've read two reports this weekend, one from Reuters, one from a journalism research project about the impact of technology, COVID, Google, and so on and so forth on the world of journalism. And within 12 months, things are changing so quickly, and it's being able to apply that domain expertise in the context of an organisation you're working with, where the real value comes.
I would advise people. I mean, I think non-execs are, as I've said in my book, are hiring the right non-exec is like pouring petrol, or can be like pouring petrol over your business. It can be, it can really speed up the rate of growth. But you can also get it very wrong and take the wrong advice and go down wrong strategic paths. Of course, you want it to be an accelerant. And I would advise people, in the same way that they would interview for many members of staff, take references, not written references. Speak to people that they've worked with in the past. Get to the nub of what they were great at. What were they great at? What were they not so good at? What were their failures? What were their weaknesses? And get them to meet lots and lots of different people in your organisation too. It's such an important. It's not an expensive hire. You're getting a great deal of knowledge. From paying them just for a few hours a month, which is why it's such a great opportunity and more people should do it, and people should have more non-exec directors. But getting it wrong can end up in tragedy and misery and failure. So I'm always surprised at. I've had many non-exec directors working with me, and they've all gone on to do different things. No one's ever phoned me for a reference on a non-exec. No one said, "Oh, how they were when they were working with you," and I'm quite staggered by that, really. How much due diligence do you find people do on? Is it your famous repartee that's enough on its own to and track record, Stephen, or are people starting to delve down a bit more now?
No, they're not. And I tend to get hired by reputation, and predominantly through networks. So somebody who's worked with me in the past has approaches me directly or through a network, and that tends to be the start of an engagement. Quite actually, it's funny. Quite a few of my clients are we've worked together before because they're former employees, and it's probably three or four actually, and that's hugely rewarding in itself. The other thing, to build on your point there, Gary, is um, um, due diligence on the part of the non-exec director, because you're going into uh, uh, and you said it at the outset, a vulnerable position, a position where you have exposure to a lot of risk around the organisation, and you need to know as an individual that the organisation that you're getting involved in is sound and solid, but also from a relationship point of view, you're able to work the individual. So I think it works both ways. Around the boardroom table, you need to be able to work with individuals. So I do all the things that you describe as part of due diligence or as onboarding, just as best practice, getting to know people.
There's a word I heard. I wish I'd made it up myself, but I can't take credit for it. And it's called pronoia, and I'd use that in context of many non-exec directors. It's the sort of opposite of paranoia. Really, it's the illusion that people are saying good things about you behind your back. And many non-exec directors that I've met believe that. They're kind of believing their own magic, and the real answer is they're not. People aren't saying great things about them behind their back. So, coming back to that word humility that you used earlier, I do think that's an important quality. Well, I think this has been interesting. If someone's never hired a non-exec director and they're looking to do so for the first time, beyond what we've talked about over the best part of the last 45 minutes or so, are there any kind of other further nuggets of information or advice that you'd offer up?
I think relationships of trust are really important. And you're right, the right non-exec can be transformational as part of a team, and it might be more than one person, because depending on the skills that a particular organization needs, especially if it's growing incredibly quickly. But I think you've nailed it in networks, past experience, and chemistry. Being able to get on with people is really important. And I think about some of the most difficult conversations I've had, and I regularly have difficult conversations with organisations that are pursuing a course that isn't necessarily wise. And that ability to be able to look someone in the eye and say, "Hang on, do you want to think about this for a minute?" is so important. And so fundamentally, good relationships are critical to making this work.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. Stephen, thank you ever so much. I'm grateful for you taking the time out to come and talk to us. Wish you absolutely all the best. How long does your PhD take before you finished it?
Oh God. So up to, I'm doing it part time, so up to 8 years, but hopefully I'll do it in 5. I'm just attacking it. I am. Speak to my partner. I'm attacking it with the same vigor and energy that I attack anything else in my life, and yeah. And again, this is part of my, I guess, retirement project in that, or future, not retirement project, future proofing project, in that I'm trying to make myself relevant and contemporary for some years to come.
Well, I say thank you very much. The very best of luck for you. Thanks to you. Thanks for sharing your insights and thoughts. And I hope to meet up with you in person soon and share a glass of wine in London.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gary.